The World We Create, From God to Market, by Tomas Björkman, read by Mark Meadows. Chapter 8. The Market, the Postmodern Era's Highest Authority. We will, in this chapter, take a closer look at the market. We do this because the market is the most dominating aspect of our current collective imaginary. It has even started to dominate all the other important fictions of our current imaginary, like the nation-state and democracy. The market seems to surround us as water surrounds fish. It has come to be our enveloping social reality, and therefore often rather hard to spot. Consequently, instead of us controlling it, we and our society are controlled by it. The ambition of this chapter is thus to convey the insight that we cannot let the market become our new God, and that we instead start seeing it as the incomplete human creation it is. Over the last half-century, the market has stealthily become the dominant ideology of the world, thanks to the value vacuum of our time and the lack of any other shared narratives. The market has taken the role as our primary authority, with a language of its own that permeates most aspects of our society and culture. It has managed to become so dominant through functioning as a watered-down compromise between the rational, exaggerated faith in the human beings, i.e. the consumer's reason and autonomy, and the postmodern age's denial of absolute values. We often take the market for granted, as though it were an inevitable force of nature, and only rarely do we manage to see or analyze it clearly. The market is an incredibly efficient tool and can serve us well, but this does not apply always and everywhere. We live with an image of and a faith in the market that does not comport very well with what actually happens in reality. As a former banker and financier, I have used the market as my personal gateway to many of the questions posed in this book. I have had many years of experience with the market, of how we make money and create value. I have long been working in the engine room of the world economy, so to speak, where I have observed the market and got an understanding of how it works and why it sometimes does not work so well. All entrepreneurs must understand their market, but a banking entrepreneur must understand the market in itself. Without any product of their own, bankers need to get the market to deliver profit from the market itself. In its purest form, this is called market arbitrage. Hence, in some way the market is both the investment banker's product and laboratory. The investment banker experiments both in, on, and with the market, and the better one understands it, the more money one earns. An investment banker quickly realizes that money is a commodity, and, like all other commodities, it has a price. It takes time to digest that even money has a price, that money costs money, what we call interest. Through interest, one can get the market in itself to deliver profit without having any real commodity to sell. This is the principle behind most financial instruments. When other entrepreneurs produce innovations to earn money in the market, the banker must understand the market so well that he can earn money on the market. As an investment banker, you are one of the few who have a license to twist and turn the market to create profit directly from it without producing anything. As a banker, I could not help but feel a little bit like a high priest, a member of a small, select group allowed to step behind the curtain and into the most sacrosanct area of our current society, into the market itself. But it also made me question what money really is, made me see it as a language and the most vital component in a vast self-organizing system. Language and symbols in different forms have been the means of communication that during much of history have coordinated our collective actions. In the Stone Age, primitive forms of language, such as sounds and gestures, could coordinate the social relations of 20 to 30 individuals in small bands. With the emergence of more advanced language, we could effectively hold together upwards of 150 people in tribes. And with symbolic language, humans became capable of creating narratives and social imaginaries that could shape millions of individuals into religious and national communities. In our globalized civilization today, the language of money coordinates the daily activities of more than 7 billion people. We may not understand each other's vernacular languages, and we often have great difficulties understanding foreign cultures. But even in the most remote village in the Amazonas or Siberia, most understand the uncompromising and unambiguous language of cold, hard cash. Money talks, and the market is a language most of us speak and understand today. With the language of money, we have attained an unprecedented level of global coordination. It may be a meager and one-dimensional language, but it is highly efficient. To obtain this efficiency, however, we have sacrificed much meaning, cultural value, and nuance in our communication by replacing many complicated aspects of value with a number, the price. In many regards, this number is rather arbitrary. It does not tell us what is better or worse, what is economically or socially most sustainable, or what is really most valuable to humans. But the price unambiguously tells us what an individual here and now is willing to exchange a given service or product for. Most of our social reality has been subjected to this principle, and it is this that above all coordinates most of our daily activities in the market-driven society we live in today. Much of reality is thus ranked by and reduced to its market price. But the market is not just a mechanism to coordinate our productive activities. It is also a power structure to determine who is entitled to what. Money is power, not just something that characterizes powerful people, but what makes them powerful to begin with, whether it is the size of their personal bank accounts or how much they have at their disposal through private or governmental organizations. When the full potential of the market was finally realized during the early modern period, and when it became evident that wars were won with money, organized violence as the primary means of societal cohesion and management was gradually subjugated to the logic of profit and economic utility. Since then, money and the market have come to be the most important means of power to control society. Moreover, the market is a smart power structure. It is efficient, and it is difficult to see through. A means of control becomes more powerful when most cannot see that it controls them, and thus cannot question it. What is it that makes the market so efficient at coordinating our productive actions and distributing resources? The answer is that the market is a complex, self-organizing system. It is efficient because the billions of daily transactions that make up the world economy are coordinated by the collective brainpower of everyone who participates in it, rather than a limited number of authorities who would not be able to obtain a complete overview of everything that is produced and consumed. Letting individuals use their personal judgment to calculate maximum utility in accordance with the logics and principles of the market is far more efficient than making it a task for centrally governed control mechanisms. Fewer resources are thereby used to control the market, and more calculation resources are made available to sustain and optimize it. It does not, however, ensure that resources are distributed equally, or even that resources are distributed rationally where they are most needed. But it does optimize the degree to which products and services are produced and distributed to those willing to pay the highest price. When markets are allowed to function freely, when people are free to decide the price of their commodities and customers are free to decide from whom they wish to buy, money functions as a language that, in a most effective and frictionless way, tells the system what shall be produced, in which quantity, and to whom it shall be distributed. And it does so rather automatically, with no one to carry the overwhelming burden of organizing it all. The system organizes itself towards maximum economic efficiency through the participation of each and every individual merely seeking optimal utility for themselves. During the 18th and 19th centuries, science and philosophy became increasingly interested in understanding the market. At this time, it became clear to philosophers and social researchers, there were still no economists, that the market had come to be a significant societal force. The research area that began studying the market's societal effects was called political economy. The 18th century philosopher Adam Smith, who has been called the father of economics, presented the idea of the invisible hand, which we today would call a theory of self-organization. According to Smith, economic life is governed by an invisible force, almost a law of nature, which ensures maximum utility if allowed to roam free. Governments should therefore not intervene in economic affairs if the invisible hand is to yield greatest possible economic efficiency. Accordingly, many of the economic models that emerged in the 19th century were based on Smith's ideas. As I have described in my book, The Market Myth, our view of the market is tinged by the economists' simplified models that appeared during this period. However, it is important to realize that the simplified economic theory, which still dominates within academy today, was born out of deep disunity. The classic standard economic model, which it came to be called, arose after a major academic battle at the end of the 19th century. In historical accounts, it goes under its German name Methodenstreit, the method dispute. Physics was held in particularly high regard at the time, so accordingly the researcher's ambition was, as in physics, to build mathematical models of the economic system. Inspired by Newton's mathematical formulae for the forces of nature, they wanted to create formulae for the invisible hand. But instead of using empirical, evidence-based investigations as their point of departure, they started from a belief in the invisible hand and made a number of strongly simplified and rather unrealistic assumptions that were needed to make this mathematical ambition succeed. The rational thought perspective's exaggerated belief in the human being's reason and autonomy contributed to an intellectual defense of a very simplified model of human action. But some political economists considered this model insufficient in providing a fair view of the market. They were not prepared to sacrifice the more complicated, subjective human factors for elegant mathematical formulae. This led to a thinking about the market which bifurcated into two scientific paths. Those who wanted to build mathematical models established modern economics, and those who did not want to make such crude simplifications would belong to the new field of sociology. Unfortunately, the high status of natural science resulted in the economists' view of the market gaining the strongest position, and thereby coming to enjoy the greatest dissemination during the 20th century. However, contemporary economic research shows that their approach was so denuded that it is often downright erroneous. It may produce correct results on paper, but it is highly questionable how well it works in reality. The economists were perfectly aware of the limitations of their models, that we should not mistake the map for the world, yet we would later come to confuse their method for reality. The limitations of our economic models became very clear to me after having gone from theoretical physics in Uppsala to studying economics at Stockholm University in the 1980s. When I asked my professor when we would try to adapt our abstract formulae to real-world economics, he just replied that at the Department of Economics we do not do this. It was simply too difficult, he added. No studies on real economic conditions or experiments were published at the time. It would take another 20 years until the birth of behavioral economics, with psychologically grounded studies of the real market and real-world consumers and decision-makers. This new psychological approach is still in its cradle and lacks a broad-based dissemination in society, but it is arguably a promising approach if we want to gain a more comprehensive understanding of how the economy really works. In the following, I will provide a brief outline of a few insights that can potentially give us a better understanding of economics and the market. As mentioned, the economists knew what they wanted: a mathematical model of Adam Smith's belief in the invisible hand. To achieve this, they had to make the simplified assumptions that were required, even if they knew they were unrealistic. These assumptions are largely based on eliminating human subjectivity and other complicating factors from the model of the market. The economists needed to assume a number of hypothetical ideal prerequisites in order to make their model work, such as rational consumers with pre-given preferences. Consumers are predictable, completely rational, and fully conscious in their decisions. Their actions are based on self-interest. They remain fully aware of what they want to buy or not, and they do not change their preferences. All market actors, including producers, simply act completely rationally in all situations. Individual goods. Utilities traded on the market are assumed to be of a rather simple kind, that are easy to handle as individual goods in accordance with the principle of private ownership. Collective or common utilities, such as the environment, security measures, or culture, do not belong to this type. Perfect competition. The market offers goods and services from various manufacturers that compete in terms of price and quality and on equal terms. If one is discontented with the price or quality, there are always easily accessible alternatives available elsewhere on the market, and there are no monopolies. Perfect information. Consumers have access to all information about commodities and potential alternatives. They are also assumed to have the necessary know-how and time to evaluate all information. The economists were also compelled to assume that both supply and demand are given beforehand. All parties are knowledgeable about what will be available on the market and what consumers want. The consumer's firm, unalterable preferences, utility functions, mean that they will not be influenced by various factors such as new information or advertising. The consumer is assumed to maximize their utility given these fixed utility functions, and companies are assumed only to be interested in maximizing their profits. This model, with idealized, highly unrealistic assumptions, is called the perfect market. But this is a very unfortunate choice of words. It leads us to believe that it represents a desirable and attainable ideal condition. The perfect market is merely perfect because it fits into the mathematical formulae, nothing else. A better name would thus have been the economists' assumed market. If so, fewer people would probably have confused the model with reality. The crux is that the market that the models describe does not exist in reality. In reality, we know, for example, that advertising works, which means that we as consumers do not have given preferences. Our needs and wishes are the results of our culture, social norms and expectations, and of the marketing strategies of producers. The human being is not perfectly rational, neither as consumer or decision-maker, and competition is far from perfect in most parts of the market. Another problem with our current models is that we are forced to assume that the market always remains close to equilibrium, that supply and demand balance each other out. Today, however, we know that complex, self-organizing systems never find themselves close to equilibrium. One of the things that characterizes complexity is, after all, that it remains far from equilibrium. In a fully equalized market, there would be no profits to be made. The free market as we know it is full of relations far from equilibrium to yield highly unequalized profits. The perfect market does not exist in reality, and, as we shall see, it does not behave particularly well, not even in theory. The perfect market lives its life on the desktops of theorists and is built on certain notions of efficiency. If the theory's ideal prerequisites are fulfilled, the standard economic model predicts efficiency in the sense of profit. This is not, however, the same as the outcome, even in theory, being desirable in other respects. It is important to understand that economic efficiency in terms of profit is the only thing the model promises. No other inherent values are accounted for. It does not claim that the results are fair or ecologically sustainable, not even under the most perfect circumstances. Although it often turns out that way, the model does not even guarantee satisfied customers or suppliers. That the standard economic model can give us a simplified view of efficiency within the economy is in itself not a problem. We need simple models to make sense of complex phenomena. The great problem arose when an erroneous view of the model took hold in popular belief, and we forgot that the model presumes certain unrealistic assumptions in order to be valid. In popular belief, there is thus a conception of the market's abilities that far exceeds what the economic theories ever intended, an erroneous view of the simplified market models that came to characterize much of our thinking and even made its way into political thought during the 20th century. It is often believed that the market is fair and able to accommodate not just our individual needs, but also our common needs and utilities, and that it generates positive long-term effects. But all of this is wrong, and all serious contemporary economists are aware of this. And yet, the popular misconception persists. Unfortunately, this has had major implications. It governs both the general public's and our politicians' perception of the market. We have started to believe more in a naive image of the model than actual reality. Even if seldom expressed, certain unrealistic assumptions about the market have thus made their way into our understanding, such as the beliefs that it is fair, that everybody gets what they deserve according to their economic abilities, that it favors long-term development, that market forces inevitably generate social, economic, and technological progress, that it creates diversity, that if the market is allowed to roam freely, it will ensure the largest number of different products and services desired, that it considers everyone's interests, that everyone's needs and desires are treated as equally important, that it is possible to apply it for all types of utilities, that all kinds of products and services can be made available on market terms, and that it is best if done so. In the following, we shall look more closely at each of these common misconceptions. That the market is fair. Not even in theory does the market provide fairness. The distribution of resources that is considered efficient by economists has nothing to do with fairness. Fairness is quite simply irrelevant to the market. No form of fairness, no matter how we choose to define it, everyone gets what they deserve, everyone gets what they need, and so on, is a mechanism we can ascribe to the market. Quite the contrary. Economic theory shows that the market tends to fortify existing injustices and that market players are not treated equally. We like to search for human causes behind events. We want the injustices in the world to be the result of greedy people's actions. To be sure, as an investment banker, I have seen lots of greedy people, not least in the financial world. I am, however, still prepared to agree with Adam Smith that moderate greed works as the driving force of the market. However, the great problem is not the greed of individuals, but the maximization principle we have built into the market itself, that much becomes more and little becomes less, that rich becomes richer and poor often becomes poorer. This is a greed in the market's way of functioning that, partly due to the political influence of capital-heavy special interests, has been built into the system. If a market player is particularly efficient, the system makes sure to reward that by providing the means to expand that actor's activities further. If one is good at making profits, more money becomes available for further growth, and with that, the ability to outcompete or swallow less efficient competitors. If someone is less efficient, on the other hand, the market makes sure to limit that person or organization's activities and ultimately subordinate them to those that are more efficient. As such, the market does not ensure that resources are allocated to those who need them the most. This is not our current idea of economic efficiency. Rather, the efficiency it ensures is that those most capable of generating profit will experience a positive feedback loop to expand their activities, while those less capable will be subordinated and limited in action by the former. In this way, the market ensures that the most profitable agents come to dominate the economy at large, while the less so are pushed to the periphery. The market is therefore good at what it does, namely yielding economic efficiency in terms of profitability, but we like to believe that it is capable of doing more than this. The market can create a large number of economic resources, but the degree to which it manages to redistribute these as rationally as possible remains dubious. The market is uniquely good at baking the cake, but not at dividing it. That the market favours long-term development. A certain short-sightedness seems to be built into the market through the mechanism of interest. The short-sightedness of interest can be said to hinge on the insight of our own mortality and the old behavioral scientific truth that no organism likes to wait for its reward. For instance, consider the following thought experiment. How much do you want a year from now to lend me £1,000 today? £1,010? Oh no, that's way too little. £1,050 then? Not quite enough. How about £1,100 then? OK, we have a deal, you might agree. As such, the price of the loan is 10% interest. But if I pay it back in 10 years, 10 years is a significant chunk of one's life. But what about 50 years? Or 100 years? Why would anyone give up money for 100 years, even if you ended up with more in the end? Very few would agree to this, because they obviously would be dead by then. Our personal mortality entails that money has greater value for us today than in the far future. Interest is a sort of compensation for the decreasing value over time. This is the foundation for interest, and thus the relative short-sightedness of the market. If we had an expected lifespan of 20 years, market interest would most likely be much higher. If humans could live for centuries, yearly interests would probably be much lower. This may sound quite reasonable. After all, we are all going to die, and thus have good reasons to be impatient. So where lies the problem of a market that rewards quick results? The way I see it, it is unfortunate that the market sets a general market interest rate that applies to all projects. Today, we only have one market interest rate, and at a level that promotes quick business success. But societies need different interest rates for 100-year-long infrastructure projects than the rate that private citizens need for car loans and mortgages, or the rate that works for entrepreneurs who seek a quick profit a few years down the line. Societies, which hopefully do not collapse in a few years, must be able to plan and carry out projects with a very long investment horizon. A major bridge or new railroad tracks have a lifespan of more than 100 years. Such projects can be very profitable for society in the long term, but with high market interest, it often becomes rather unmanageable financially. Private consumption, long-term investments in privately owned assets such as cars or houses, and public investments in infrastructure are examples of three areas that arguably should be handled with different interest rates. Today's system, however, only has room for one interest rate. It simplifies and makes matters more efficient, but in many cases also extremely skewed. Future generations are not market actors who can influence today's choices, just as they have no representation in legislation. If they had something to say, we might have seen a completely different market structure than that of today. Under such a scenario, long-term and sustainable solutions may not have been undermined by today's short-sighted market interests. That the market creates diversity. In many cases, the market increases the supply of different kinds of services and products, but it sometimes also has the opposite effect when the supply is limited by what provides the best revenue. In central Prague, for instance, supply is limited to crystal wares and cheap T-shirts. Mediterranean tourist destinations are totally dominated by soft drinks, sweets, and sunscreen, and on Italian television, there seems to be nothing but quiz shows with half-naked women on Friday nights, since that is currently what yields the best advertising revenue for the TV channels. But does this mean that the citizens of Prague wear nothing but T-shirts with images of the Charles Bridge, or that Italians only want to see trifling TV entertainment with scantily clad women? No, of course not. But here, the market has simply yielded less diverse outcomes. What is supplied does not necessarily reflect all demands, simply what is most profitable. What we actually desire, or what we most urgently need, are not guaranteed. Sometimes certain market conditions lead to homogenization rather than diversity, and often the result of too narrow a focus on profit leads to cultural impoverishment. Cultural assets may be difficult to measure in economic utility, but they nonetheless remain something we consider important and enriching. That the market takes everybody's interests into consideration. The language of the market is money, and the entrance ticket to the market is money. Money talks, but if you have no money, you have no voice. As far as the market is concerned, a poor person might as well be dead. The inflow of money is the market's only information channel. The market ignores everyone without financial resources, and since neither the people of the future nor the poor have money, the market is not fed information about their preferences, and thereby no considerations are made in regards to their interests. The market pays no consideration to the environment or limited natural resources either, since they are not part of the profit model. Profit is created by exploiting natural resources maximally. Every drop of oil must be extracted from the ground, and waste must be dumped in the cheapest possible way. All this as long as the consumers do not actively choose to pay for more sustainable and costly manufacturing methods. The same conditions apply to labor. Profit is often created by exploiting an underpaid workforce in environmentally hazardous locations, since this is the cheapest option. No consideration is given to these people as long as no one with money requests this. Through the market, we use natural resources and labor to satisfy human needs. In this process, there are always revenues and expenses. We spend certain resources in order to obtain others, and if spent wisely, we should end up with higher utility than we started out with. But profits and loss are only measured in terms of profitability to the producer. Environmental losses are, as mentioned, not accounted for, but neither are the actual losses and benefits for the consumer. If a transaction is good or bad to the consumer, whether it makes the person more or less happy, or whether it causes more harm than benefit, is entirely irrelevant. The degree to which the market produces things of high utility to humans is of no concern as long as it makes profits. For instance, when a patent for a medication expires and the medication becomes available at low cost to those who previously could not afford to pay, which may save lives, the lives saved will not enter the calculus, only the revenue loss of the pharmaceutical company. No consideration is taken to this in our present economic societal calculi. But this is quite strange, really, since it means that we do not measure the most important aspects to determine economic efficiency: how we consume our finite natural resources, and how well we satisfy human needs. Considering ecological sustainability, and thus future generations' chances of having as good a life as we have had, along with the actual benefits the extraction of these finite resources can provide to human lives, should be a self-evident part of our economic thinking, and determine what will be considered loss and profit. Bewilderingly, it isn't. That it is possible to use the market for all types of utilities. The standard economic model assumes products and services that are easy to define and measure, that can be privately owned, and that are used up when consumed. This applies to many of the products that were scarce in early industrial society, such as coal and steel, bread and potatoes, and so on, which explains why the industrial age produced an economic model revolving around such commodities. But there are a host of utilities that do not meet these requirements. There are areas that quite simply cannot be subsumed into the market without the system capsizing completely. Market thinking turns downright alarming when applied to many of society's shared functions, the collective goods that cannot be reduced to simple consumer commodities. With the recent decade's surge of privatizations, an increasing number of society's collective interests have been brought to the market, such as water and electricity utilities, railways, telephone services, and so on. Some of these have worked well on the market, others arguably not so much. We have got cheaper telephony, but train tickets have not become more affordable. The punctuality of public transportation has not improved either. The competition among providers of such services forces everyone on the production side to keep costs at a minimum. Privately owned service providers are usually more inclined towards cutting expenses than publicly owned. After all, the former has a profit motive, the latter does not. But in some cases, this leads to very disastrous consequences. In the case of train operators, it has resulted in inadequate maintenance of rails, since rail maintenance yields no profit in the short term. At stake are passengers' lives and health, something that is hard to measure here and now, and likely to be neglected when competition threatens the profitability of private investors. Privatizations in health services, education, and elderly care, which, to varying degrees, have swept the world in the past couple of decades, have also seen their share of unfortunate consequences. In certain countries, people have been denied life-important health care because they have not fulfilled complicated legalities in their health insurances, legal details that privately owned insurance companies have employed armies of expensive lawyers to investigate, so that care can be denied and profits thereby maximized. Students have been burdened with ever-increasing fees and loans, subjecting them to a life of servitude as a result of private universities and loan givers seeking to maximize profits as well. In my home country of Sweden, the absurd and unforeseen consequences of school privatizations in recent years have led to a number of bankruptcies, with the result that schools have closed and children have been without basic education in their local community. Schools have even competed in guaranteeing high grades and offering more fun and less demanding curriculums. The end result has been a growing distrust in the grade system and pupils finishing school with poor skills in basic maths, writing, and reading. In many countries, the privatization of elderly care has led to abandoned seniors put to bed at 5 o'clock, often without diaper change, showered once a month, and rarely offered walks outside, all in the name of increased efficiency and profitability. And being able to talk with someone, basic care in the form of someone who actually cares, is of course not part of this new concept of efficient care. The compassion and human contact, which is just as important in the care we show our fellow humans, has thus become an occasional event to occur between the more schedule-adapted work tasks of an increasingly time-pressured staff. If profit is the main goal and the results of labour have to fit into economic calculi, less measurable tasks such as listening and consolation are likely to be rationalised away. The result is a level of service that may appear efficient on paper, but in terms of what we consider good care, is below what anyone would wish for their loved ones or themselves. And still, we cannot simply disavow ourselves and blame the market or the owners when they are merely doing their job. There is no reason to remonstrate over the market in itself. If we hand over healthcare to the market, it will do its job and produce services in a cost-efficient manner, as cheaply as possible, with as large a profit as possible to its owners. It's business, so why would they do otherwise? Yet we become livid when the profit-maximizing companies weigh urine-drenched diapers in retirement homes to maximize the use of the diaper's capacity in order to produce care at the lowest possible cost in order to pay maximal dividends to the owners. But this is precisely how the market works. It has done exactly what it is good at. If money has been saved on higher capacity diapers, or if staff have been cut to limit the amount of unnecessary chit-chat, the market strategy has been efficient and succeeded well in the only manner in which market success can be measured: maximizing profit. The limitations of the market. If we make health insurance a private responsibility between independent market players, what sense does it make to be morally outraged about care denial when customers fail to properly investigate the legal terms of the service they have purchased? And if medication is made a market commodity like any other, it should not come as a surprise that certain medications are sold at higher prices than most can afford. If demand exceeds supply, or if a company has a patent, why should we expect them to sell their commodities at anything lower than what is most profitable? Similarly, if the goal of our education institutions is to yield profit, why should we expect them to request a lower price for their services than what they can get away with? As long as students purchase these services, why should we question the quality of their education? After all, if the students are not satisfied, they can always, as good consumers, switch to another supplier. With the privatization of the school system, we should not be surprised either to see schools competing for customers by offering them higher grades and less demanding topics. Once again, the market has merely done its job. The customer is always right, so why should they not shop around for the best offers? And why should the market not attempt to accommodate their wishes? And if we make schools and other services subject to market terms, why are we then surprised that they close down when their businesses turn unprofitable? That is, after all, the whole point of the market: ensuring maximum profitability and making way with what does not comply with this principle. However, the better the market succeeds, the more livid we become over news reports that expose the unfortunate results of things that the market is ill-suited to accommodate. This does not mean that privatization is only negative. We just need to more closely evaluate what privatization can accomplish and what it cannot. The market is superbly efficient and good at what it is supposed to do, but it is not a universal institution for everything that needs to become more efficient. The market is efficient in terms of profit, but it is blind to whatever cannot be expressed in money, and a blind efficiency is every bit as sinister as it sounds. The market is good at producing an abundance of consumer goods and selling it as cheaply as possible. This is because products and services that are easily defined and consumed fit perfectly into the logics of rational consumer behavior. If we want to have pins, give the assignment to the market. There is no better way to efficiently produce pins. The market will ensure that the cheapest iron ore is purchased, that the most cost-efficient manufacturers are hired, and that we will have an abundance of cheaply made pins available. But the fact that the market works well for pins does not mean that it works well for everything. If we take the example of elderly care mentioned earlier, food and cleaning are aspects that can be expected and have proved to benefit from privatization. If a retiree is unsatisfied with the quality or price of the food, or the staff realizes that is the case, another supplier of food can be found to deliver a better and more affordable product. And if those who clean the retirement home are too sloppy or require too high wages, the managers can find someone else. Food and cleaning are aspects that can benefit from privatization, since their contents are easily defined and measured, and thus makes it simpler to weigh quality vis-à-vis costs. But when it comes to the quality and efficiency of the care itself, then we are dealing with a service that is not as easily measured and thus is not as well adapted to market terms as food and cleaning. Good and compassionate care is hard to quantify. Inserting it into rational utility-optimizing calculi is nearly impossible. Expecting it to reveal itself as profits on the bottom line is never going to happen. To expect people who are senile or too weak to protest to behave like rational consumers and find another supplier of care if they are not satisfied is not very realistic, especially if they do not have concerned enough relatives with the necessary financial means to request another service provider. The problem is not that politicians seek to improve efficiency through privatizations. After all, funds are limited, and if they succeed, there will be more resources for other things. No, the problem is that privatizations have been used rather uncritically, without any understanding about when the market can be used and when it is not appropriate. Instead of carefully investigating what functions benefit from market conditions, what exactly it is that the market does, and why those mechanisms would improve a given service, privatizations have become an ideologically determined measure, considered a good in itself, but without any consideration to the wider implications, and with a poor understanding of the market in the first place, has been imposed on anything its devoted advocates have mustered political support for. But certain functions are quite simply not possible to privatize. The service of caring for a human being is too complex for the market to handle as a commodity. This commodity has too much content regarding the human being's inner subjective dimensions for it to be packageable and tendered administratively on the market, which primarily operates within the outer objective dimension, where everything is measurable and calculable. But the degree of empathy and compassion in health and elderly care is too difficult to measure objectively. How many times a day someone's diaper is changed, or how often someone is taken out for a walk, can easily be measured. But whether the diaper change is performed with respect and kindness, or the degree to which a strolling partner is a good and friendly companion, is not as easy to measure. The quality of such work must be evaluated by other standards than financial ones. This is already a difficult task. Determining the degree of empathy in one's staff requires careful observation and individual evaluation that cannot be obtained from an Excel sheet. But in a setting that prioritizes economic efficiency and profitability, and a care sector characterized by constant rationalizing pressures to perform, the emphasis on compassion is likely to be under-prioritized in the end. It is simply not possible to tender healthcare services with at least 1 hour of empathy per day, not because the companies do not understand that empathy is important, but because the supplier, who nevertheless budgets for the invisible cost of empathy, is likely to lose out to companies who neglect this aspect. Cruelty there is none in this, the Swedish author Victor Rydberg once wrote about the effects of capitalism, merely arithmetic. Multidimensional human values are difficult to reduce to the market's unidimensional value world solely measured by price. According to the market's idea of value, services must be procured by the individual healthcare consumer, who then should make their own valuation. But often, such a valuation is only possible afterwards, when the service has already been consumed. The only way the market can function in this regard is if the hospital or retirement home resembles the hotel business. There must be real competition between service providers, and the consumers must be in a position to switch suppliers if they are not satisfied. If a customer is not satisfied, they can promptly check out and go across the street to another hotel. However, personally, I barely have the energy to do this as a healthy businessman after an Atlantic flight. Expecting an old, sick person to do this with regard to elderly care, assuming there are even any alternatives, is not very realistic. This would be too large a responsibility to place on the consumer. If the consumer cannot handle the procurement process themselves, for instance, if they lack time, knowledge, or strength, the service should not even be offered through the market. Sometimes we simply need to be able to rely on being well taken care of without needing to use the threat of changing suppliers. In itself, this has value for the customer. It can be compared to how we trust that a qualified electrician will not make dangerous installations, or that a bank will pay back deposited money. The market cannot offer these guarantees by itself. Only legislators can create the prerequisites for the market to do so. If that is not possible, we should find other means than the market to offer the service in question. The market is an efficient, albeit blind, piece of machinery, but it is always we humans who must make the final assessment regarding the desired consequences and end results. Without competent analysis, the market's efficiency can yield unexpected and ultimately undesired results. We can never excuse the negative effects of the market and just refer to those as the unfortunate but fair will of the market forces. If things do not work on the market, it is not the will of God. It is our responsibility to change it for the better. The market is simply a tool to obtain certain goals, and when it does not, we need to find another one that works. Economic efficiency is an important value which ought to be coveted, but it is also the only value that automatically results from the market. Other human values such as dignity, fairness, sustainability, and empathy must be consciously built into the market. The market has expanded into domain after domain of our society and culture, hand in hand with the postmodern worldview that made its entrance during the latter part of the 20th century. First of all, the postmodern thought perspective has been used to legitimize the market, even though this was not the intention. When the grand ideologies fell to the wayside, very little remained to believe in. Postmodernism's value vacuum did not contribute in setting up new overarching goals for society, hence the field was left open for the market. The market succeeded in proliferating itself for lack of a yardstick or any official value compass. Postmodern moral relativism thus became a perfect background for the market's newly gained dominance. Efficiency has been an extremely important value throughout human history, but postmodernism's moral relativism has allowed the market's efficiency to spread at the expense of other values. Efficiency, such as the ability to produce great amounts of material riches, have been necessary for survival and to create tolerable lives. But in the West today, we have attained such a high level of material welfare that we must ask ourselves whether it might be time to let other values matter just as much. GDP has doubled over the last 30 years, but it is questionable whether this is proportional to how much better we are feeling, whether the actual utility for the individual also has doubled. Western society is currently threatened from several corners. From the outside in the form of religious fundamentalism and burgeoning authoritarian superpowers in Asia, from the inside in the form of xenophobia and fascist tendencies. Still, I do not see these as the greatest threats to the secular liberal market society, but rather the failure of the market society in symbiosis with postmodernism to create meaning, hence triggering the threat of inner social dissolution. If the market stands alone, we will experience a great number of negative consequences from the cultural and existential emptiness that it causes, and that postmodernism does not seem to be able to handle. Societies have been created around shared principles and values, and have survived revolutions and catastrophes by adapting to new conditions. The secular market society that the Western world has created, and that has given us unprecedented liberties and affluence, is the product of the toil of many generations. I basically see this as a good society, a society that has liberated the individual from feudalism's harsh social confines, one that has fed a growing humanity, and a society that produces culture, science, and charitability at an unprecedented level. I definitely do not belong to the postmodern choir that insists that nothing has fundamentally changed or that everything is getting worse. Things have improved. We live longer than ever, we are eradicating disease after disease, and we generally live better and more meaningful lives than ever before. Previously, free capitalism was considered threatened by the socialist states. Today it is rather the Islamic world that is cast as the threat to our way of life. But Islamism is hardly a threat to our society, in spite of terror attacks from radical Islamist groups and the terrible human tragedy they cause. The greatest threat to the market society is rather its own inability to create meaning and value. As early as 1945, Karl Popper described the market's inability to generate credible meaning and value systems in The Open Society and Its Enemies. Where earlier society's main problem was a lack of food and material assets, in the affluent societies today, the lack of meaning and motivation, pointed out by Habermas, is one of the greatest challenges of our time. The market has not succeeded in creating an integrated meaning structure. Rather, the reverse seems to have occurred, as the market is in the process of breaking down the meaning structures that already exist. The idea of the responsible citizen has been subjected and reduced to the market's logic, and thereby demoted to a passive consumer, where political participation has been replaced by political shopping of various producers of political commodities. And in the religious domain, meaning has been reduced to a product directed at the individual's personal needs rather than a social, meaning-making context to be part of. Many things have now been subject to market adaptation and, as such, lost deeper values, meaning, and content. We need a deeper social context to feel that we are actually part of something meaningful. Without it, society disintegrates into a bunch of individuals that only associate as economic agents. A society cannot solely consist of consumers and producers. The market-liberal worldview is impoverished, unidimensional, and void of meaning in any greater sense. Alienation, which the young Marx wrote about, is a serious threat to our well-being, our sense of meaning and context. If individuals cannot find meaning in their life, they will deaden their existential anxiety with distractions such as vapid entertainment, alcohol, drugs, and unfettered consumerism, or even self-harming behavior or misdirected violence. The revolt against stale, conservative thought systems during the post-war years was necessary, and so were the economic liberalizations during the end of the last century. We needed to tear things down to get air and light, as August Strindberg once wrote. But as individuals in the society that has now emerged, we are left in a vacuum between political correctness and neoliberal emptiness. Postmodernism's moral relativism has meant that the market has not received significant resistance, and that economic efficiency has been able to spread at the expense of other human values. In our postmodern world, the market has become our new fundamental authority, a secular god. But nor should we throw away the market. We must move on and, as humanity, take the awkward responsibility of creating new shared values with greater consciousness and insight, but still continue to use the market as the capable tool that it is. We must give up our naive popular belief in the market and become better at deciding what needs and utilities it is suitable for. We need to become better at seeing through the market, to see it for what it is.